Hey folks, so welcome to this discussion about AI spend to AI outcomes and what does the data say? And we'll talk about how engineering organizations are moving from AI spend to AI outcomes. And excited to kind of chat with you today. Um, we are going to share results from our landmark study, the AI engineering report of kind of 2026, which, unlike many reports, this one is actually based on telemetry. While many others are based on surveys, we actually assembled the telemetry from over 4,000 teams, over 20,000 developers over 2 years to measure how actually they're using AI and how their teams move from low to high adoption. I'm Vitaly Gordon. I'm the CEO of co-founder of Faros, who is the company behind this report. With me is my good friend Martin Harrysson, who is a senior partner at McKinsey. Martin leads software product development practice and works with McKinsey clients on all things AI engineering. Hey, Martin, great to have you here.
Hey, Vitaly. Thanks so much for having me here. This is such an interesting and I think relevant topic for so many of our clients. So I love the fact that, we put some real telemetry and data behind it. So looking forward to talking through the insights. Mm.
So, yeah, let's start here, which is, the report has a lot of kind of amazing data in it, and I suggest to everyone to kind of go download, read it. Because we're short in time, we're gonna focus on kind of just four of the main finding of the reports. But everyone on the webinar, please feel free to comment in chat. We'd love to hear from you, and please post your questions. We'll try to address them kind of towards the end. So let's start with the state of AI adoption and usage and what's the data say. So, first and foremost is, now obviously AI is now the standard, right? Like everyone is using AI, unless you kind of lived under a rock, you're probably seen it. And so that's a point. That point is kind of, not debatable now. But probably what is, more surprising with how quickly things are moving is now AI is kind of the primary author for, most of the code. And actually, like most of AI generated suggestions, 60% of it are being accepted. It's 18 months ago, it was just 25%. Now it's kind of, over 60. So, maybe kind of let's talk, Mari, about what's driving it. You work with a lot of engineering leaders. Kind of like, are they aware on kind of that distinction between assistant and author and like copilot and agent has essentially collapsed?
Yeah, it's moved really fast, hasn't it? I think we even if you go, I mean, if you go back like just a year ago, um, I think I just saw, Claude Code was launched a year ago, which like is almost kind of crazy to think about, like
Oh, wow.
how well known and like everyone talks about it, but it actually I was just saw there was an event to signify that, which I think is shows a little bit how fast things are actually moving. I think this whole move from assistant to author is indeed really happening. I mean, we've had like AI assistants and autocompletes and chat and so on in these tools for a while. But I think what has really happened, and I think even more so almost from the end of last year in the last 6 months, much more like really sort of taking some real pieces of the work. So you spin up an agent and you actually, set up a spec, you do something much more end to end. That has really only taken shape, I would say, for a lot of companies in the last several months. And and I think we've hit a little bit of a critical mass when it comes to, the proliferation of the tools, the capabilities of some of these tools, and the models sort of got kind of good enough for that to be happening. So that has really been a big shift. And we often talk about this in like in some horizons that, there was an initial horizon when you had like the co-pilots and assistants. We're getting into another horizon where you have much more agents doing whole tasks and so on. I think we're also though yet to go. I think there's more horizons coming where we start seeing actually more end to end, teams of agents collaborating tasks, and I think we're not yet there. I think as well as the data suggests.
Yeah, and kind of like to talk about it because especially it's interesting how I guess more advanced the frontier of that, and referring to a tweet I think it was yesterday or something like that by the author of OpenClaw, Peter Steinberger, and he said, hey, stop prompting your agents, just like write loops and have the agents kind of loop in it. So it's not even, like humans are almost like unnecessary in the entire process of creating software. However, from our data, it shows that agentic authoring is really kind of, under 1% still.
Mhm.
And kind of, I'm wondering kind of what's your take about, is it just we need more time? Is there something about the enterprise that maybe will prevent them to ever kind of reaching that level? Kind of what do you see?
Yeah, I think I think maybe a little bit of both of that. So, like, I mean, this is undoubtedly, I think we need some more time. But I think what's also what we're starting to see is I think we're running into a little bit of the bounds of kind of how much more and how much you can accelerate by just inserting tools into the current ways of working and the current setups in most engineering teams. And so I think what's happening is, we've started accelerating, certain things, and I think we'll get into this, but yes, undoubtedly yes, more code is as you mentioned, is being produced by AI, no doubt about it, right? More PRs, more commits, like the kind of measurement of code generation is steadily increasing. I think where we haven't then kept up is when you get to some of the things around it, the scaffolding, the way that we, govern how code is then deployed to customers or to users, and those processes, right? And I think we're starting to see us bumping into those kind of bottlenecks, right? And I think that's the next step now, which most of our clients need to tackle and figure out how to change them so that you can, improve the performance end to end.
Yeah, so let's actually maybe switch to that. We spoke a bit about adoption. Let's kind of look at the impact AI is having and what our data is showing. It's mixed bag. So roadmaps are definitely moving. The entire inner loop is up. Epic delivery task, PR merge rate. However, quality is deteriorating. Like we see spikes in kind of incidents per PR, bugs per developer, monthly incidents, everything. And this is what we refer to as the acceleration kind of whiplash. And so, like, when you sum it all up, is there kind of a real net ROI, especially with this like crazy kind of spend in tokens? And before, kind of we saw the crazy kind of Anthropic numbers, and both Anthropic and OpenAI now file for an IPO. We also, what probably was the most surprising kind of thing for me was that uh, in Silicon Valley, you kind of hear the meme is like, Cursor is kind of dead, and now everyone is using terminals and all that. But like even Cursor, like is now at over $4 billion of revenue, up from like 2 billion like 3 months ago, or some crazy like that. So, what is paying for all that spend?
Yeah, no, I think this topic has really come into the limelight recently, right? With a lot of tech executives commenting on the spend, right? And I think we're seeing like a little bit of that. We're still as an industry relatively immature of like how we do all of this, right? So as you mentioned, there's no doubt that there's a speed up or more throughput, if you will, right? We see whatever almost you take, we have here epic task PRs, commits, etc. It's the pace is increasing, right? Now, what's also happening then is I think there's a the quality, the average quality of that code has not improved in the way that the average throughput has improved, right? And so you get more volume, more code, and even if it's not necessarily that it's significantly worse, but we're sort of paying a bit of a downstream tax, if you will, where we see, our ability to review code that comes out, the ability to validate it, our sophistication in how to write evals and being more diligent with, specs and tests upfront has not kept up in the same pace, I think, that we're seeing like the generative part of it, right? So all of that comes together and leads to some of these effects where we're seeing the some quality issues as this code is pushed through. I think um, I think this is like it's a little bit indicative of a phase that we're in, right? But it's what I like about the discussion we're having now is that we're actually having a real discussion about value and ROIs and outcomes, right? Where I think as a discussion even just 6 to 12 months ago was much more about just speed and productivity and getting more done, right? And I think, Vitaly, to your question, I mean, um, is there real net ROI? I think it's I so if I take a step back, I think fundamentally there can be a lot of ROI, meaning like the tools can improve things, right? But I think as any tools, it's as much about how you use them and what you do with them and what you apply them to, as it is to, you know, how good the tool is itself, right? And I think right now the tools have gotten very good, but I think our ability to apply them on the right tasks, knowing what to do with the output and so on has not kept pace, right? And therefore we're seeing this gap between, what we're, investing in it and the potential return. And I think that gap is real, but don't I don't believe that that means that AI and software development is not going to be a productive venture. Like,
Yeah, and actually, let's stay on this point for a second because I think you have a very interesting vantage point, from McKinsey's perspective. That a lot of the work that you folks are doing are with CFOs and people more on the finance side, and at least historically, the CFOs stayed away completely from engineering, right? Maybe, there was some sort of budget allocation and headcount planning, but other than that, there was very little impact on like which tools to use and how to use them. But now we're
yeah,
seeing levels of spend that are genuinely now threatening like earnings per share reports for, public companies. And
yes.
so, kind of I'm curious, what are you seeing in terms of like, let's say, kind of the conversations that now are, CFO's concern? Is it a, temporary issue? Like, what are you folks seeing there?
Yes, no, no, you're right. I think it is really interesting because like there is no, fewer organizations like are willing to just net increase their spend on their software development all of a sudden, right? In a big way,
Hmm.
right? So what's happening when the AI spend is going up, that raises a lot of questions, both from CFO but also the CEOs. And
Hmm.
and I think where it's what's then is interesting. I think often in technology organizations we've been using metrics that sort of and that relates to things around like pure engineering throughput and output, and that doesn't really it doesn't really suffice, I would say, right? If you have a CFO that comes to talk about the increase in spend, being able to say that, hey, we have this many more pull requests per person, they're gonna say like, well, I don't I don't care about that. Like that's like
Yeah.
what does pull request means and so on, right? And so I think what it's actually, I think the positive part of that discussion, I think that is that it forces technology organizations to spend more time thinking about how they up level this, right? What are some genuine like business outcomes that you can drive from this? Can you actually shorten time to market, right? And get things deployed in a faster way that reaches customers in a useful way? Can you actually are you building, features that are actually better and that match what we intended to do in a, more productive, faster way, right? And so I think it's like it actually, I think the healthy part of it is that it creates a discussion that forces you to think about real business outcomes because you're now paying real dollars to get this done versus something where you can, only think about, engineering metrics are still important in engineering and as you think about how to set up your software development teams, but they're not necessarily the thing that your CEO or CFO is going to care about.
Fascinating. And so maybe, going from, the most strategic to maybe kind of a very tactical.
Mhm.
Let's talk about what all of this is doing for the role of software
Yeah.
engineers. And, so what we observe is, context switching is up, right? Like developers touch way more code than before, but they're also thrashing. There's like so many, more tasks, 14% are moving back to progress after, supposedly done. 26% more tasks start and then stall for more a week. And we also found, not in this graphic, but you can read it in the report, that the complexity of every PR engineering now deals with is like, 50% larger and touches 60% more files. And so I'm curious, what's your take on this new reality for, engineers? Like, is it good? Is it bad? Like what will it do for the role of an engineer?
Yeah, this is another fascinating topic, and I think it's another place. If I think a little bit of a theme here is that we've moved the bar pretty quickly on some elements, but not everything has caught up. And I think this is another place where what's actually happening is that the job of someone being involved in building software, and I'm using sort of broad terms deliberately, right? Because I think we sort of developer and coder and those
Mhm.
kind of terms have a very, I think, often a specific meaning to many people that it's like, someone that is, writing code and like, which is, the how you used to develop software. Increasingly, and you see this, of course, like with, you know, a lot of senior developers that are, talking about it externally, but we also see it at our clients. Increasingly, software engineers are not writing code anymore. Instead, it's this like you're getting pinged by, you're launching, some agents or set of agents to do something, and then something else comes up, right? And which I think is that type of work is driving this extreme increase in context switching, right? And we're seeing the memes of people going around with half-open laptops, right? So because you have this like
Yeah.
change in work pattern where it's like you launch things and it takes maybe it doesn't take days or something like that, but it often takes minutes, right? But it takes long enough that you don't want to, you can't sit and stare. You start something new, and it means that you have this constant, just stream of things coming back, right? And I think I would say that like that is not necessarily a problem in itself, but it's a very different way of working, and it's a different job to manage all of this. And in most organizations, the job hasn't fundamentally changed. So you're expected to do the same thing. You're expected to go to the same meetings. You're expected to, you know, participate in a process that looks, mostly the way it used to, right? And I think those two things are clashing. And so what I think this is a call to action is to really rethink, what are the roles of our people that are building software going forward, and how do we define those role boundaries in a way that actually reflects this new nature? Because to a large extent, I think it's actually has, for all the talk about AI taking jobs, I think in a lot of places it's actually just added a lot of workload, and I think people are feeling busier and more distracted than ever before.
Yeah, and kind of it's just a funny anecdote from this morning. I was kind of as I was getting to the office this morning, I was taking a lift, and I was and I was still running some kind of long-standing AI kind of workflow. And I'm like, oh my God, like, but I don't want to close my laptop. And I went into the car sitting in the back with the laptop tethered to my phone in order so like just the kind of the working will continue. And it's like it really kind of changes. kind of how people work. And we even now start seeing in our data something that we started referring to as like vampire engineers. And this is like people
Hmm.
still, commit code in kind of really kind of the past midnight and 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Like this is something that we haven't seen that much before. Obviously, it was exist, but like just the rate, it spiked. Is just kind of crazy, and I think it all leads to kind of this conclusion that we have to kind of figure out what is kind of the new system that design
Hmm.
for this world. And so let's really take a closer look at, what happens when AI floods a system that is kind of built around human-based development and kind of human quality code with output that was it never designed to absorb. So as our data show, time in progress is now like up over 200%. Waiting for review is again over 150%. And actually, like the time in review is now like sometimes it says, there's a kind of 5x the median. And so this is kind of we see similar thing for lead time. And part of it might be because we're seeing people maybe still treat kind of AI and AI generated code as a second citizen, and maybe they're just not getting to it kind of fast enough. That's definitely a part of it, but also is just the system is overwhelmed. And I think a good example is what we see in the open source community that anyone
Hmm.
with a $20 subscription can submit, NPR, and like these poor kind of open source maintainers just cannot keep up. So there is now like I think they created a kind of a reputation system for people who use AI indiscriminately, right? And so now like if you're kind of using it, like people will know about it, and it's kind of crazy like what we have to adjust. And so, what are you seeing kind of on the ground happening?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is as one of the reasons I really like this data as well, like, because I think it puts some like real numbers at like what a lot of people um, are feeling like, because I think there's a lot of, I mean, we talked previously about the individual like fragmentation, but then also as teams and organizations get overwhelmed, right? Because we've sped up and we've increased throughput in some parts of the system, but not all, right? And I think this is where when you start scaling this, right, and um, you have, for example, like to take in, I often talk about we have when you use AI as an individual and as you're by yourself, I think it's pretty easy. Everyone has seen this. You get 10x faster or more, right? You kind of if you do a personal project, you scope it, you run it, and you review it, and it's great. And so then you sort of think, okay, well, what if I just get everyone in my organization to do that? We'll be 10x faster across the board. The problem is that's not how most software and products is being built. It's actually you need to collaborate and you need multiple parties involved and you have dependencies and so on, right? So as you move from, and what an individual does to a team, this you get the outcome which you see here because we have often many companies still have teams that have 8 to 10 people with a sort of most of the people being ones that code and generate code, right? That's a reflection of how it was in the past because they used to be the bottleneck. So we set up teams that reflected that. So you had like a reasonable amount of people building compared to QA and review and compared to product management and so on, right? Now the equation has fundamentally changed, but we haven't yet changed all our both our people setup, and we also haven't, let's say, changed our practices because we cannot the system wasn't built for and we cannot manage to like review everything afterwards. We have to build in much more effort and confidence in our way to carefully spec and define output up front and being clear on what success looks like so we can automate things at the end, right? There's just no other way to otherwise deal with this, or we'll end up seeing these bars go even higher if we just continue to crank the churn on what we build.
Yeah, and the way I kind of refer to it, I think we're at really the dawn of the industrial revolution where we kind of
Hmm.
invented the steam engine, but we still haven't really invented the assembly line, and so there's
Yeah.
still kind of more way to go. Let's take some questions from the audience. There is a question here for Marian. So McKinsey has access to the world's greatest company in their experience transitioning to AI-driven engineering that much smoother or better than in younger, less established companies. So I guess, sorry, the question is, do you folks see, maybe I'll kind of rephrase the question, is, the main kind of highest order bit, what you folks see in companies adopting AI or not, is it really kind of like the maturity of the company, like I'm saying, the age of the company, is it the kind of the size of the company, is it the industry that it operates, or is it kind of hard to predict? And there is like really, is it the leaders of the company? Like what really kind of for you shows that this company is really on the kind of cutting edge of AI versus the company is kind of lagging from behind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think um, we've we've seen you'd think I think that a lot of a lot of leading tech companies would sort of have an easier time doing some of these things. But I think it's sometimes also there's multiple forces at play here, right? I think we're so the question was also alluding to some examples of what we've seen in large tech companies. It's not necessarily that just having like a high tech maturity, I think, makes this a lot easier. Because if you recall, a lot of what we talked about are really people challenges and organizational challenges. If you have tens of thousands of people that need to work in new ways, that needs to have, new jobs, that needs to be in new team setups, that needs to be upskilled, etc., that is a massive change, right? And I actually think that this is such a paradigm change that the fact that you have a more mature tech organization, I think I wouldn't say that it's not helpful at all. I think clearly it's good to have like good practices, good maturity, but that is not the main part of the issue. It's mostly a people transformation. So we are seeing, I mean, I think a lot of large companies are seeing that. They always, in pockets, yes, there's people who are doing phenomenally well and that are, standing out teams of agents and doing fantastic things. But you often have the 80+% of organizations that, it takes some time to go through this. So I think the large organizations have quite a challenge going through this, and it's often helpful to be, you know, maybe, I mean, we see a lot of smaller companies moving faster in this, right? And I think that's mostly driven by just the sheer scale of the people change.
Yeah, and so maybe in the 1 minute left, let's try to sneak another very quick question here is, if the theme of this year report is acceleration whiplash, what is your prediction of the theme for next year?
Oh, so great question. Again, it's um, I mean, I hope that it will be that it's the theme is much more around like how we're seeing actually some, fundamental operating model changes taking place, right? And so like basically maybe we get if I don't know, if we build on that analogy, maybe we found the airbag or not to
Mhm.
avoid the whiplash that basically holds organizations, in a steady place, like even as things are accelerating. So, that would be my hope at least and aspiration as we, hopefully we can help our clients figure out how to drive this large scale change.
Yeah, and I'll just offer mine. I think, a year in AI is infinity. So I'll maybe, let's talk about the second half of this year to be kind of like a little bit, closer. And I'll say probably for me, it will be that we kind of finally, stopped token maxing and started outcome maxing. And I think that's
Mhm.
probably like what I hope the theme will be. And so, Maureen, thank you so much for taking the time and spending this time with me and everyone here. This was a fascinating conversation, and thanks everyone who joined. And I believe that recording, will be available soon enough on the first website. So have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vitaly. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, folks.